Disney's biggest disaster wasn't a villain. It was their own princess. A film meant to relaunch a beloved fairy tale became a $270 million embarrassment. Empty theaters, online mockery, and a leading actress who seemed more interested in preaching than performing. Snow White was supposed to be Disney's next golden goose. Instead, it's become the most infamous flop in the company's modern history. And at the center of it all, a 20-something starlet who believed her fame would eclipse decades of Disney magic.
Snow White bombs, breaks records for the lowest live-action remake opening ever. Let me say that again. Ever.
This is the story of how Rachel Zegler, once hailed as Hollywood's next big thing, managed to bury an empire under the weight of her own ego. From starlet to Snow White, the rise of Rachel Zegler. Rachel Zegler wasn't just another actress. She was the one everyone had their eyes on. A breakout role in West Side Story catapulted her into the limelight, followed by a role in The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which raked in hundreds of millions globally.
And to everyone who hates when I win, the winged victory came to the Louvre in pieces.
She had the look, the voice, the charisma, or so it seemed. When Disney announced her as the new Snow White, the world watched. The House of Mouse was betting big, reimagining their oldest princess for a new generation. But this wasn't going to be the fairy tale you remembered. No, this was something different, something divisive. The princess who hated the story before filming even wrapped, Rachel made headlines, and not the good kind.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
Instead of celebrating the legacy of the original 1937 classic, she trashed it. In interview after interview, she scoffed at the idea of a princess dreaming about love. She called the old Snow White weird, labeled the prince a stalker, and said this new version would ditch all that outdated nonsense. To some, it sounded like progress. To most, it sounded like arrogance. The internet exploded.
You know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
Why accept the role if you hate the story? One user tweeted. Others chimed in. You don't modernize a fairy tale by mocking it. And just like that, Rachel had turned millions of Disney fans against her before the movie even premiered. And then came the quotes, the ones that made even her supporters cringe. I hate men, I just want to be president. People will line up to see my movies despite my flaws. I'm like the winged victory of Samothrace at the Louvre. The internet didn't take long to react. Memes flooded X. TikTok was ablaze. Commentators called her disconnected, arrogant, and painfully out of touch.
Rachel Zegler is extraordinarily woke, but she's woke in a way that's quite deranged. There's something wrong with her. She's disturbed, she's unhappy, and she thinks it's about feminism and the patriarchy and about abortion. But the reality is she's just not stable, like the majority of people in Hollywood.
Critics dubbed her the poster child for Hollywood hubris. What was meant to be empowering came off as smug. What was framed as progressive sounded like a lecture. And with every soundbite, Rachel pushed the audience further away from the movie they were supposed to be excited about. When the curtains opened, nobody came by the time Snow White hit theaters. The damage was done. The opening night preview numbers were shockingly low, just $3.5 million.
I would highly advise that you boycott this film, no matter how much your children love Snow White.
By the end of the weekend, it had scraped together $43 million, a death sentence for a film with a bloated $250 million budget. Add marketing and reshoots, and Disney was reportedly looking at $450 to $500 million just to break even. It didn't happen. By April 1st, global earnings barely crossed $140 million.
Rachel Zegler hurt the film's box office with her actions in since-deleted comment. This is the exchange.
A second weekend nosedive of over 66% sealed its fate. Theaters were empty, popcorn buckets went unsold, and Disney was left with a corporate catastrophe. A cringe TikTok and the final nail in the coffin. If you thought things couldn't get more awkward, Rachel had one last trick up her sleeve. In what she likely thought would be a cheeky viral moment, Rachel and friends walked into a theater decked out in Snow White swag.
The cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power.
She asked for 2 tickets. The Regal employee replied, "For which movie?" Silence. Confused looks, nervous laughter. "For which movie, please?" Rachel smirked, clutched her themed popcorn bucket, and tried to play it cool. But the internet wasn't having it. The clip went viral, but not in the way she hoped. Viewers called it delusional, embarrassing, and a sad reminder of how out of touch Hollywood has become.
If I'm going to stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online.
From movie star to political flashpoint, Rachel's downfall didn't just play out on the silver screen. It exploded into the political arena. Her rants against Trump and his supporters were nothing new, but during Snow White's collapse, they resurfaced in full force. She was accused of alienating half the country, branding millions as evil, ignorant, or worse.
They had her tweet out like a little, "Yay, Snow White, can't wait, so excited, I love to play her." And she did it and got like millions of views, and they were like, "Good job, Rachel." And then she, like minutes later, followed it up with, "And never forget, free Palestine."
MAGA influencers like Danica Patrick reposted videos torching the film, using Rachel's own words against her. Even fellow celebrities weren't safe. Pedro Pascal praised her as an icon and was promptly dragged for it. Audiences weren't interested in virtue signaling. They wanted a story, a character, a reason to care. What they got instead was a lecture wrapped in CGI. Behind the scenes, drama with Gal Gadot. As the film floundered, whispers from the set started leaking. Sources claimed Rachel clashed with co-star Gal Gadot during filming. Arguments over lines, creative disagreements, and worse, growing political tension. Rachel's vocal support for Palestine clashed with Gadot's Israeli heritage. Fans took sides. Disney hired extra security for the cast. And by the time the Oscars rolled around, it was all icy smiles and cold shoulders. Even Rachel's pageant jab at Gadot, "This isn't a beauty contest," was viewed as petty and unnecessary. Whatever unity the film had tried to show on screen was shattered behind the scenes.
Gal started getting death threats. She's Israeli, and I think served in the IDF.
She did.
They flew an executive, one of the producers, out to go visit personally with Rachel Zegler to say, "Could you please take that down?" And she wouldn't.
Inside Disney's corporate offices, the mood reportedly turned grim. Anonymous insiders claimed higher-ups were astonished at how badly the film had tanked. Some pointed the finger at marketing for not containing the controversies. Others blamed social media missteps, wishing they'd reined in Zegler from the start. Rumors swirled that certain executives were on the chopping block as the company reeled from a string of underperforming remakes. Speculation about future remakes also spiked. Would Disney try to inject modern messages into other classics? Or had Snow White become the final straw? The conversation centered around whether audiences had simply grown tired of the formula, or if the film's heavy-handed approach and controversies were solely to blame. In the midst of this, rumors suggested Disney might consider shelving some in-development adaptations, potentially saving millions in production costs rather than risking another fiasco.
And then they had to hire a special media consultant for her to follow her around all the time and make sure she didn't continue shitting on Snow White and the prince.
The star at the epicenter, Rachel Zegler, found her reputation in freefall. Hollywood casting whispers suggested she was now a risk for big franchises. Sure, she had talent. Her singing voice remained undeniable. But many in the industry viewed her online presence as a ticking time bomb. Why hire someone who might tarnish a project with public feuds and polarizing opinions? Even potential supporters who liked her activism worried about the negative press she drew. Social media continued to buzz, with hashtags like #RachelWho and #SnowWhat trending alongside scathing memes. Once excited about a fresh Disney princess, some fans felt betrayed, while others simply found the entire story comedic, like watching an unwarranted meltdown from a star who had everything handed to her. Even the success of her earlier roles faded from the conversation, overshadowed by the blockbuster fiasco. Zegler's attempts at damage control, often tearful apologies or statements about being passionate, fell flat. Apologies might have worked months earlier, but now they seemed like too little, too late. For industry watchers, the implosion of Snow White became a cautionary tale. It wasn't simply about remaking a classic or switching up plot points. At its core, the meltdown showed what can happen when studios bank on controversy to fuel interest, only to see that controversy spiral out of control. The Get Woke, Go Broke crowd championed the film's failure, wielding it as proof that pandering to modern trends without respecting tradition results in financial catastrophe. Disney wasn't the only studio taking notes. Others had also flirted with the idea of radically modernizing beloved stories or leaning on social media-savvy stars to capture younger demographics. Yet the Snow White outcome proved how quickly an outspoken celebrity's online presence could backfire, tainting a production long before opening weekend.
So what do you think the odds are of this person working ever again?
Hollywood executives suddenly found themselves reevaluating casting decisions, social media policies, and how far they could push reimaginings of classic material without alienating fans. Another poignant lesson emerged about disrespecting source material. Updating a storyline is one thing, but mocking the original or insulting the audience that cherished it is quite another. Rachel Zegler's approach, criticizing fundamental aspects of Snow White's legacy, crossed a line for many. They didn't mind an empowered princess, as long as the spirit of the classic survived. This fiasco made it clear, if you belittle what people already love, they'll walk away in droves. And then there were the dwarfs, or rather, the lack of them. Peter Dinklage publicly blasted Disney for its portrayal of the classic Seven Dwarfs, calling it regressive. In response, Disney scrapped the characters, replacing them with magical creatures of various sizes and ethnicities. But this backfired too. Real dwarf actors, including Jason "Wee-Man" Acuna, slammed the move, saying Disney cost them jobs. Fans saw it as a desperate overcorrection, and no one was satisfied. Critics now say Snow White didn't just have an identity crisis. It became a Frankenstein film, stitched together with politics, PR panic, and too many cooks in the castle. In the end, Snow White wasn't just a box office bomb, it was a cautionary tale. Rachel Zegler had the world at her feet, but instead of embracing the fairy tale, she tried to rewrite it, to turn it into a manifesto. The result? A $270 million mistake. A princess without a kingdom. A story no one wanted to hear.
I'll quickly mention this. The son of Snow White producer Mark Platt, Jonah Platt is the son's name. He is speaking out publicly against Rachel Zegler and blaming her for the film's catastrophic failure at the box office.
Hollywood is now rethinking everything. Disney insiders whisper that future remakes like Lilo and Stitch will tone down the messaging. Studios are quietly backing away from heavy-handed activism. And Rachel? She may have accidentally saved the industry from itself by becoming the example everyone's trying not to follow. Because at the end of the day, audiences don't line up for sermons. They line up for stories. Did Rachel Zegler kill Snow White? Or was it doomed from the moment Disney traded fairy tales for feminism? Let me know in the comments. And if you love the tea, hit that like and subscribe. Because Hollywood's just getting started,